Dr. Jenkins here. We are back for another chapter on ergogenic aids. So here we go. Now, in the first chapter, we discussed pharmacological or chemical ergogenic aids, right? So we already did that one. Now we're switching gears to talking about some nutritional ergogenic aids. So make sure you review the definition for what constitutes a nutritional ergogenic aid. Anything that is meant to improve performance, because that's what an ergogenic aid is defined as, something that's meant to improve performance, that is some sort of byproduct of a nutrient, and it could be a food or a plant. So it's not chemically based. It's not mimicking something in our body, like we talked about a lot of things that mimic our natural hormones. Those are all considered chemical ergogenic aids. Here we're talking about nutritional byproducts from food or plants. We're just going to jump right in because the structure is very similar. We're going to go through a list of potential ergogenic aids, talk about what they are, what their proposed benefit is, and then whether or not they actually work, right? I've done my best to try and make this information current and thorough. As a matter of fact, I just added and updated some slides as of this recording. So we try and make this as top-notch as possible. Okay, so here's our outline. Again, I'm just going to please ask you to ignore that. I apologize. Here's the outline for all of the nutritional ergogenic aids we're going to discuss. Don't worry, you're not going to have to know all of them. That would be ridiculous. And folks, this is a short list. There are so many more out there. It's almost impossible to keep up with. And you see I've grouped them. So you can see I've grouped them into things that are meant to affect fat metabolism versus a protein or amino acid ergogenic aid, and then other. Let's start with ergogenic aids that claim to affect fat metabolism. I put in red what you need to know. So let's talk about L-carnitine. L-carnitine, you'll see a lot of different examples out there. It is found naturally in meat and dairy products. Our body makes a tiny amount, but it has a very important function. So it is something that's nutritional, that's found in natural foods. You can see some sources here. I'm not going to ask you this, but food and dairy. And what it's something in our body that facilitates the transport of fatty acids. Facilitates just means helps. So this is something, when we talk about fat metabolism, L-carnitine is a little chemical that helps bring fatty acids into the mitochondria of the muscle. And we have this naturally because we can get it in regular foods. So the thinking is, well, if this is a chemical that naturally helps to bring fatty acids into the mitochondria of the muscle, which means that it helps the muscle burn more fat, well, the thinking is if we just bring in more of it, if I bring in more of this chemical, if I bring in more of a chemical that is needed already to transport fat into the muscle, maybe I could burn more fat. If I could burn more fat, maybe I have more energy. And that might be something beneficial to an endurance athlete, of course, because an endurance athlete is going to be burning much more fat. In terms of our high intensity or strength athletes, it is also marketed as something that is helping to delay fatigue. And it is also marketed for weight loss. So even marketed to a non-athletic population, because it can help to transport, potentially, it can help to transport more fatty acids into the muscle. If we can bring in more fatty acids into the muscle, we could burn more fats. What do you think the actual results are? before we do that, we did talk about this way back in Module 6. We talked about all the steps that were needed for fat metabolism. Remember, what are our muscles going to go to first for energy? Carbohydrates. But as soon as they can, our muscles are going to start to burn fat because fat gives us more bang for the buck, more energy per gram. And remember, ultimately, our muscles are burning some sort of carbohydrate-fat mixture. A high-intensity strength athlete who is going to be exercising at a really high intensity, but for less amount of time, they're going to be utilizing more carbohydrates. Not all, but more. Some fat, but more carbs, versus an endurance athlete who, because they're exercising for so much longer, isn't able to keep up as high of an intensity. Well, they're going to be relying more on fat. But fat is kind of a pain in the butt. It's got to go through all these steps to be metabolized by the muscle. And one of those steps, this one here and this one here, involves carnitine. You don't need to know all of these. I'm just reminding you that carnitine is a chemical derived from red meats and dairy. It's a chemical that helps transport these fatty acids. There you go. So the thinking is having more of this maybe means that we could burn more fatty acids for energy. But does it really work? No research has supported any of these claims. So here's a case where the mechanism of action makes sense. And we talked about this in the last chapter. You know, sometimes the mechanism of action makes sense. Steroids. Well, it's a hormone that helps us make muscles bigger, faster, stronger. So if we bring in more, our muscles can get bigger, faster, stronger. So here's a case where the mechanism makes sense, but more isn't always better. Having more of something doesn't mean that it always leads to more. You know, our body, if you think about the human body, I mean, the human body systems, they're pretty much perfected. If you think about all the human body is capable of doing down to the cellular level and how often it works really well almost all the time. And even when we treat our bodies like crap, our body still keeps chugging along, compensating, making things work. Our body is a machine in terms of some of the cellular processes that works better than man-made machines. So who are we to think that by just bringing in more, it's going to make something better? It's already really good, folks. It's already really good. You know, here's a case where fat metabolism, the steps are laid out for a particular reason, because these steps in this order with this amount of all the chemicals makes our muscles able to burn a lot of energy from fat already. If we bring in more, it doesn't mean that we can already make more. We probably don't have enough receptors for it. You may have more L-carnitine floating around, but if you don't have enough receptors for it to bind to, it doesn't make a difference. All right. So remember, only be focusing on what is in red and then some of the nuggets that I'm talking about. Another really popular one, medium chain triglycerides, MCT. You'll see a whole bunch of them. This is an example of a medium chain triglyceride, hence the name. We have short chain fatty acids, medium chain fatty acids, and long chain fatty acids. This is an example of a medium chain fatty acid. So it's medium. You don't have to know how many carbons are involved in that, but it's medium. It is found naturally in some things. We talked about this way back in the lipids chapter. Our foods tend to contain long, and you can see I'm saying that here. The medium chain is not found as commonly in food because the long chain is the most common. Long chain is the most common in food. It's difficult to get medium chain triglycerides through food because it only has some applications. Probably the best now is coconut oil, which is becoming more popular. And the benefit of the medium chain triglycerides is it can enter the bloodstream more quickly. So in terms of an athlete, we would want to have more medium chain triglycerides because that particular length of the fatty acid chain can get into the bloodstream more quickly. So the proposed mechanism of action, if I can bring in more of these medium chain lengths because they can be absorbed in the bloodstream faster. If I can bring in more, maybe I can burn more. So it's the same proposed benefit as the L-carnitine. It's a different step of fat metabolism that it's aiming to help, but the overall idea is better. If I just have more of these medium chains, I can bring in more to the bloodstream and I can burn more fat. I apologize. It's that time of year here. Okay. Because of this, it may help with endurance athletes, but it's also marketed to strength athletes, and it's marketed to strength athletes more because of body composition. So this is something that could be beneficial to endurance athletes because burning more fat, but it tends to be marketed more towards strength athletes because it can, if you burn more fat overall, it can make you leaner. And a lot of strength athletes want to be very lean, decrease their lean mass and really focus on decrease their fat mass and really focus on their lean mass. And similar to L-carnitine, it's marketed as a weight loss tool. Does it work? No. Here's another thing where more doesn't always mean better. There's a reason why our body can handle long chain fatty acids because they're most commonly found in foods that we've been eating for hundreds and thousands of years. So just because we take in more doesn't mean that it's necessarily better. There are some potential side effects to taking a lot of it, cramping, diarrhea. I'm not going to ask you about that, but there you have it. Okay. Oh, what about glycerol? Glycerol is, and I have to tell you folks, I had a good time making this PowerPoint presentation because it was so fun. I think bodybuilding.com is where I got most of these from. The marketing is fantastic. If I look at this, it looks like it's a professional product. But remember, a lot of this is not scientifically backed. The FDA doesn't do any oversight. So you don't really know what's in that pill or in that powder. It's just marketing. Glycerol happens to be something that's part of a triglyceride. So if we think back to our fat chapter, our chapter on lipids, a triglyceride is made up of 3 fatty acids and a glycerol. So, these companies are smart. They're smart enough to know that a triglyceride is made up of 3 fatty acids and a glycerol. So therefore, they're going to make supplements that have fatty acids, which we just talked about, the medium chain fatty acids. And why not? Let's make another supplement that supposedly targets this. So it's another part of the triglyceride. Its proposed benefit to athletes: it may conserve energy, and it may protect against heat illness. I'm not sure where they get that from. But this is what the companies say. Does glycerol really work? There is no research to say it helps with energy, for saving energy. In extreme environments, it may protect against heat stress because that glycerol can be turned chemically into something else that plays a role in our thermoregulatory abilities. But these are not extreme environments that our athletes are going to see that often. And furthermore, there's so many other things that are more important in extreme heat. It's much more important to worry about your hydration, your electrolytes, everything else. This small benefit, to me, and to many other in this field who know what they're talking about, doesn't really outweigh what you really should be focusing on. Look at this one, conjugated linoleic acid, CLA. I mean, I look at this, I want that to be true. I wish I could reduce fat without losing muscle. just by taking this. So what is CLA? Well, it's a type of fatty acid. So linoleic acid is a type of fatty acid. And when we chemically do something to it, conjugate it, it becomes an isomer of linoleic acid, which just means that it's a chemically modified linoleic acid. How about that? You don't have to know this, what isomer means. But conjugated linoleic acid is something that is a chemically modified, good old-fashioned linoleic acid, which is a long-chain fatty acid. The proposed benefits. Again, a lot of these are focused on our strength, high-intensity athletes. Historically, they've been more likely to purchase ergogenic aids, although the endurance world is coming up pretty rapidly, not far behind them now. But this would all be about that body composition, just like the one we talked about before. The idea here is if I can bring in more of these potentially effective fatty acids, I can burn fat. And if I burn fat, it's going to enhance my lean muscle tissue. Are you seeing a trend? No scientific evidence, folks. No scientific evidence. Just because we take in something doesn't mean it's better. So far, we've really just been talking about things that are marketing to get your money without any proof. I don't know about you folks, but if I'm spending my hard-earned money on something, I want it to be safe. Especially for an athlete, you want to treat your body well, right? So I want it to be safe, and I also want my money to be going towards something that works. I wouldn't want to put my money into a car that is known to be a piece of crap, much less put something in my body. All right, so those were all ergogenic aids that are marketed towards fatty acids and towards fat metabolism. Now we're switching into a really popular, and quite frankly, protein is really important to an athlete, especially for recovery. So maybe there's some things here that might work. We'll see. All right, here's an example of one that I'm not going to have you know. It's just here for your information. Here we have something called glutamine. Glutamine is a type of amino acid. It's a very important type of amino acid, actually. It plays a role in transport. It's really important in transporting things into and out of the muscle. So the thinking is, if we have this really important amino acid, well, what if we bring in more? So when I said it was a transporter, it's a transporter because it begins this series of chemical reactions where we convert one chemical into another to eventually produce amino acids. Because, as it says here, this is a non-essential amino acid, which means this is an amino acid that our body can produce on its own. And in some cases, this glutamine can actually work backwards in these chemical reactions and be converted into glucose, which can be used for energy. This is all extra. So if that's what it does, maybe I could stimulate more production of amino acids that could go to muscle. Overall, there's little scientific evidence. So I think we don't really have any conclusive evidence yet. But you're going to see it out there. All right, here's one, HMB, beta-hydroxy beta-methylbutyrate. Methylbutyrate. Can't say that one. HMB. This is a metabolite of a very important amino acid called leucine. So it's something that is a metabolite when we break down leucine. This is one of the things it gets broken down into. And then when we go the other way, it's formed during the breakdown. Okay, let's see. So you can see when we go this direction. So just imagine we have all these chemical reactions. Sometimes that go this way, sometimes that go that way because that's how chemical reactions are in the body. And when we move this chemical reaction to the right, it forms this metabolite. So the idea is maybe it has some anti-catabolic effects. We can remember from our metabolism chapter, I believe. If not, just make sure you review it now. Catabolism is a chemical reaction where something is broken down. And we need some catabolism, but we don't want too much. So after a long workout, we expect some catabolic reactions to break down that used, stressed muscle tissue. But, and we're going to see this trend, we want to limit this period of time. And our diet can impact this pretty significantly. So we want to inhibit, or maybe I should say, as a better word, limit. You want to limit the amount of protein breakdown. Well, we're always going to have some because we need a balance. On one end, we have some catabolic reactions. On the other end, we have some anabolic, which are reactions that build. We got to have both. Sometimes we're going to have some catabolic, sometimes we need anabolic. But in general, it's good to limit catabolic reactions. So the proposed mechanism here is, if I take this supplement, which is a metabolite of an amino acid, it can inhibit protein breakdown. And if I have less breakdown, it's going to be easier for our body to rebuild that muscle tissue. This is marketed to, again, our strength type athletes, anaerobic benefits. So far, we have inconclusive evidence. I tend to be pretty skeptical. I try and remain a true scientist, and a true scientist means that you have to be open at all times to learning and taking in new data. So who knows, maybe we'll find some preparation and use of HMB where it does help to limit catabolism. We're actually going to talk later about leucine in itself. So we're going to talk about leucine, and my contention is that we can do more for our body just by paying attention to our leucine intake, which comes through food, folks. Better to come through food. So instead of worrying about metabolites and this and that from supplements that we know aren't regulated, that we're spending extra money for, why not just focus on getting the right amount of leucine? And that in itself can have downstream effects to limit our protein breakdown. Okay. Beta-alanine or carnosine, all these scientific names. Juggernaut, HP. Well, that sounds fancy. So here is another example of fancy sounding names, beta-alanine, and all it is, folks, is it's an amino acid. So a lot of times these ergogenic aids contain essential amino acids that you could get from a chicken breast or from tofu or from sorts of seafood or even beans, peanut butter. And all those natural food products give us more nutrients, they're cheaper, and they're actually regulated. So we know to a larger extent what's in them. Well, here we go again. We can take another essential amino acid and turn it into an ergogenic aid, maybe. The proposed mechanism of action is that this amino acid can protect the muscle. Because acid builds up during workouts, and we don't want that. So we take this and it can protect the muscles. Never mind, folks, that our body already has really, really great systems in place to maintain acid and base balance. Your body has amazing systems in place that cannot be replicated. Your body is an amazing machine. It can handle acid build up if you're training properly and eating properly. All right. But here we go. Let's play along. Let's play along. So this would affect our strength or high intensity athletes, because truth be told, they are the ones that are more likely to accumulate lactic acid, because they're more likely going to spend extended periods of time in that anaerobic metabolism. Does it work? So here's a case where research does show there's elevated levels of this carnosine. So when subjects take this ergogenic aid, it leads to elevated levels of carnosine in the blood, but it hasn't yet shown that it can make the leap to improve performance. So the answer so far is no. Not too shocking now, is it? Okay, let's look at arginine. Guess what? It's another amino acid. I mean, I bet we could probably find a supplement or ergogenic aid that uses each and every of the 20 amino acids. Here's another one, arginine, super NOS pump. Now, this has a bit of a different mechanism of action. Instead of being something that can limit catabolism or something that can make us build back more muscle better, arginine has a relationship to nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a powerful vasodilator. And you know what? Athletes like nitric oxide. During exercise, we have a natural release of nitric oxide. Post-exercise, you still want to have some nitric oxide, because when we vasodilate the blood vessels in our limbs, it allows more blood flow to get to the muscles. So arginine is just something that we take arginine and we go through all these chemical reactions and we eventually produce from those chemical reactions nitric oxide. And by the way, nitric oxide does help our body handle exercise and recover from exercise. But here's the question. Does taking more? Again, here's a case where we already have it naturally, but if we take more than what we produce naturally, if we take more through a pill, is it going to make me better able to vasodilate and give more blood to my muscles? No. No. In terms of the overall benefit to athletes, because of this potential improvement in increased blood flow, no. Again, if we get enough of these amino acids through our food, our body already is set up really well to be able to handle everything it needs to. All right, I'm going to pause because we're about halfway through the presentation. And this next unit, we're going to talk about branched chain amino acids and whey protein, which I think will be they're more commonly used, and there may be some benefits that are useful to us as athletes. All right, stay tuned for part 2.